Hi everyone, Aiden here with etrailer. Today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install this etrailer Class 3 custom fit trailer hitch receiver on a 2024 Subaru Legacy. Now with this being a Class 3 hitch, it's going to offer you a 2-inch by 2-inch receiver tube opening, and that's going to be great because it offers you the widest range of accessories that will work with this. Most accessories that you find out there will be for that 2-inch by 2-inch receiver tube. So whether you're going with a cargo carrier, a bike rack, or maybe a ball mount, you're probably going to have the best luck finding those accessories that work and fit in this application. Those accessories are going to hook into the hitch using the standard 5/8" hitch pin and clip. Now this is not included, but you can pick up one here at etrailer if you need one. Most accessories like bike racks will come with one though, so just keep that in mind and keep an eye out for, whatever accessory you end up choosing, what it comes with. And if it doesn't come with a locking pin, I'd always recommend picking one up. But the other thing is the safety chain loops. They're gonna be more than big enough for your standard S-style hook. So if you are towing a small trailer, this is probably the style you're gonna have. And there's plenty of room for it, and it doesn't obstruct that pinhole. You do need to keep in mind the weight capacity. The hitch can handle 350 pounds of tongue weight. That's a maximum downward pressure on the end of the receiver tube, and 3,500 pounds of gross towing weight. That's how much weight it can pull. Now keep in mind, that's what the hitch can handle, not necessarily your Legacy. So you do want to go into your owner's manual, find out what it can handle, and more likely than not, that's going to be the limiting factor here. These hitches are built to be not the limiting factor, so more often than not, they're a lot stronger than what the cars they go on can handle. Just make sure you're not overloading the vehicle, and just be cautious about that weight capacity. A few measurements to look at. From the center of the hitch pin hole to the outermost face of the bumper here is going to be 2 inches. And that's important to know for any folding accessories if you'd have clearance with the back bumper. I don't think you'll have any problem here because the receiver tube actually does stick out past the fascia, only by about 1/4 inch, so it's not anything unsightly, but that does also mean you'll probably never run into clearance issues with those folding accessories making contact with your bumper. The other thing here is the height. That's going to be going from the top inside edge of the receiver tube to the ground, which is about 11 1/4 inches. So if you find yourself with a bike rack that has a rise in the shank, that'll let you know more accurately what kind of ground clearance you're looking at. And also with a ball mount, if you do need a rise or a drop, it'll help you figure out how much. But with this being a lower to the ground car, I do think it's important to get the actual ground clearance of the hitch, and that's going to be right around 9 inches. So really not too bad. Clearance here is pretty good, and I don't think you have too many issues with it, especially if your accessory has a rise to give you that improved clearance. As far as the overall fit and finish goes, I think this is going to be probably my favorite hitch, just because the matte black powder coat blends in really well with the matte black plastics on the back bumper here, so it really looks like it belongs. Plus, the cross tube is completely hidden behind the fascia, so the only thing you see is the end of that receiver tube. And realistically, from a standing position here, you hardly see it at all. So it's very easy to just not really notice it whenever you're walking around and have it not take away from the overall appearance of your vehicle. As far as the installation goes, I know I mentioned that the cross tube is behind the back fascia, and that does mean you're going to have to remove the fascia. If you've never done that before, it can probably seem a little bit daunting, but it's really not too bad on this particular year make model. There's only a few pins that you need to remove, and if you've got an extra set of hands to help you set this somewhere safely, it'll be no problem. Aside from that, there is a little bit of trimming you have to do on the fascia to make room for that receiver tube. But again, it's really not much, and because it's all tucked underneath, if you don't do a perfect job, you'll probably never see it, so that's okay. We'll walk you through the whole process together now so you can see how it's installed. Now we're going to start this installation by removing the back bumper fascia. And that part's going to be pretty straightforward. To do that, we need to remove a few push pin fasteners from underneath the bumper and one from the top inside edge of the wheel well. And to do that, you can use something like a flathead screwdriver, or we're going to use a trim panel tool. Inside the wheel well, you'll see a couple of push pin fasteners, but we really only need this top one here. So to get that removed, I'll try to keep my hand out of the way as best I can, but you need to pop out the center. And once you pop the center out, usually you'll get the tool underneath the base there, or sometimes it'll come out all at once, but basically just lift that core and pop the base out, and that'll be the same throughout the rest of the push pins. Moving straight down from the wheel well, there's going to be one here and one further back. Those two both need to get removed. Back here, there we go. There's going to be 5 more in total, 1 in each corner, and then 3 kind of clustered in the middle here. You can ignore these corner ones because they're not actually holding that bumper cover in, and just remove these 3 towards the middle. For the driver's side, it's going to be the exact same as what we saw on the passenger side. 2 underneath and that 1 in the wheel well. With the push pins removed and before we get the bumper pulled off, we do want to cover up some of the seams with painter's tape. It's just something we like to do here to protect the paint so that whenever we're putting the bumper back on, we don't get anything scratching up these edges. So just grab yourself a roll, follow along this seam here on both the top and bottom, and that'll offer a good bit of protection. And before we pull that fascia off, we did find that we actually do need to remove these bottom 2 fasteners on the wheel well. This might be a case of not every Subaru Legacy has this because the instructions don't mention it, but if you have this small plastic trim piece, then you might need to do this too, just to get that fascia released. It's a good idea to have an extra set of hands with you when you go to remove the fascia, just to help hold it. Joe's gonna help us out today. And you wanna start from the wheel well here, prying out, kind of along this line that we laid down some painter's tape. Moving our way to the tail light where we pull straight back, releasing it from these clips. And you may need to grab underneath the fascia just to get a better grip on it. Right there, I was able to get a good grip to release that clip. We just got a few more clips in the middle that's holding this in place. If we just pry up a little bit on this plastic here to release it from those tabs, there it is. And that's why it's handy to have an extra set of hands. Now right in here, we will have a connector for our backup sensors. So just depress the tab, pull that out, and we can set this somewhere safe. Now to get the bumper beam pulled off so we can get the hitch in place, it's a little bit limited on clearance, but you'll need yourself a 14mm socket and ratchet. There's gonna be a bolt up top and one down below. These ones you can reach pretty okay with a short socket, and we'll come back through and break those loose in a second. This nut is the one that might give you a little bit of trouble, so you'll need to sneak in there with a wrench because there's just not access holes in the bumper beam. And it'll take a bit of strength to break that loose, but once you have it loose, if you've got yourself a ratcheting wrench, that's gonna be your best friend here because that'll help get that loosened up the rest of the way, and you can maybe get it off by hand from there. And then for those bolts, again, just go back through with the socket, break them loose, and get them removed. Now on each side of the nut, I'm gonna leave this barely on. That way there's something at least holding the bumper beam in place so that we can let this down a bit more gently. So right there, it's only got like 1 or 2 threads. I'll leave that and do the other side. I'll just remove the nut from the driver's side fully. All the other hardware's removed too. This side's now loose, and I can just get the last thread off of the one from the passenger side. and just pull this off of those studs and again, set this to the side. We can take our hitch and put it into place, sliding it over the factory studs and using the factory nuts to hold it in place. So I'm just gonna thread these on each side loosely because I do want a little bit of movement here just in case something isn't lining up perfectly. And with these on, I can do this all hands-free and not have to worry about this falling back down. Take our fish wire, push it up into that hole. And one thing I'm noticing right now is that the hole on the hitch isn't lining up perfectly. So I'm just gonna tap it, and that gives me enough wiggle room. I'll probably have to do that again on the way out with the carriage bolt, but I'll feed that fish wire out the front of the hitch. When I pull this out, I'll put a small bend in it just to make sure it stays put and doesn't fall back in as easily, and repeat that on the other side. With both fish wires fed through, we can attach our carriage bolts by just threading it onto the end, pushing that inside, and pulling from the other end. And again, it feels like it's not lining up perfectly, so I'm just gonna tap the hitch to get that to fall down through and seat properly. So as I thread on the flange nut, with both carriage bolts in, I can safely remove those factory nuts because now the carriage bolts are holding the hitch up. And when they're both removed, I'm going to pretty much immediately put the bumper beam back into place over those studs. And reattach the factory nuts to now hold everything up in place. The remaining hardware will be new from our kit. We're going to take those M10 bolts, slide the conical tooth washer over them, and make sure the teeth are facing in towards the hitch. These will replace the factory bolts, 2 for each side, and just thread right in place where they once were. Now I'll try to keep my hand out of the way as best I can here, but just get everything hand tight first. And if it's not lining up, you might need to move around the bumper beam or the hitch or both. That one caught pretty easily the first time, so I'll just go around for the remaining spots and add that hardware. I'll go back through with a 17mm socket and snug all of this new hardware down. If you have trouble getting into these hard to reach places, you could go into these slotted holes here and remove this cross beam from the main mount. You don't have to do that though. I found a short socket fits on there just fine. And especially to get this most of the way tightened. And then when we come back through with a torque wrench, again, if you have clearance issues, that's a way around it. And once everything's mostly snug, you can go back through with a torque wrench and fully torque down the hardware. Just keep in mind that the upper bolts and that carriage bolt down below will have different torque specs, but you can find those in your instructions. The other thing is, if you don't have a torque wrench, you can pick those up here at eTrailer if you need it, or you can choose to check one out or rent one from a local auto parts store. We'll just go through all the hardware and repeat that process. With the hitch torqued down, before we can put the fascia back in place, we need to trim out a small hole for the receiver tube. So when we remove the push pins in the very beginning of the install, on the very back side we had 3 kind of clustered towards the center, but the middle one here is offset by just a little bit. This tab right here is the center, and all I did is mark out the edges here with the tab, and I measured up about 3.5 inches or so. It's not a bad idea to maybe give yourself a bit of extra room here so it doesn't hit the hitch, because realistically, this is so far underneath the bumper that you'll never see it. So if it's not perfect, it's not the end of the world to me. And it's gonna make it a lot easier if that doesn't touch the hitch to align these pinholes whenever we put the fascia back on. So when you've marked out your location, you can grab some sort of cutting device. I'm going to be using a multi-tool, but a pair of snips or even a Dremel will work just fine too.
I'm going to go back through with a file and just clean off some of the plastic burrs that remain there, just to make this a bit more clean. But again, if you really don't want to do this, you don't have to. This isn't really going to get seen.
All you need to do is then put the fascia back on, making sure to reconnect the factory plug over here before clipping everything back in place the same way we took it apart. And that'll do it for a look at and installation of the eTrailer Class 3 custom fit trailer hitch receiver on our 2024 Subaru Legacy. Thanks for watching.